The results came back to show that I had started to reverse my symptoms. This, as far as I'm aware, was absolutely unheard of in MEN1 patients before, to have consciously reversed their symptoms. My consultant said to me, whatever you're doing, it's working.
Hi guys, Lizzie here. My good friend Dr Erin Hayford invited me onto her Sacred Illness podcast to share my standout journey with MEN1, as I am now symptom-free, medication-free, and have absolutely no surgeries on the horizon. She kindly let me share this video with you personally, so you could hear why my MEN1 journey has been radically different to so many, and how I no longer have to fear the next round of bad news. Let's dive back in.
I was diagnosed with MEN1 when I was just about to turn 13. I'm 27 now, so 14 years ago. MEN1 is a genetic endocrine disease that runs in my dad's side of the family. Very sadly, his sister passed away with the condition before it was known to be in their family. He suffered a lot of problems with it. They found out it had come through from their mother's side. So I had a little bit of context to this diagnosis. My parents felt at the time that genetic testing was the best option to take. I had a blood test taken and I received the diagnosis in one disease, a genetic mutation. I was so young that I maybe didn't fully comprehend everything. I remember being told this is what's likely to happen based on what we understand of the disease so far. And something inside of me said, you'll be okay. It's going to be different for you somehow. It was this slightly stubborn little resilient voice inside of me that said, okay, it's going to be different. I knew that I had the disease from the age of 14. We were actually told not to expect any problems until I was in my late 40s, which was when it had affected my father and his sister. My grandmother wasn't really symptomatic until much later in life. Lo and behold, about a year later, I become incredibly symptomatic. I go through all of this testing and they find out I'm very unwell. The way that MEN1 works is that it produces lesions on the endocrine glands in the body, and it tells the body to produce too much of certain hormones. I had two nasty tumors they found on my pancreas gland in a scan, and they said those need to come off as soon as possible because when they get to a certain size, they're at risk of spreading. I was 14 at this stage. My parents sought a few different opinions. They went with what they thought was best. I just did what I was told and underwent some surgery. Being symptomatic, I look back now and it wasn't coincidental. In these teenage years, I had a really rough emotional time. My parents' marriage was starting to break down, and my way of coping with it was to pretend it wasn't happening and just to get on. People used to tell me, you're so strong and you're so resilient. I think I used to take that as a bit of a kind of ego boost to be like, oh, yeah, I look like I'm coping and I've got it all under control. What I understand now is that I probably wasn't coping. It's that my body was taking the hit for what I wasn't really allowing myself to feel at the time. Things then lay low for quite a few years. And then I had the same problem again with more of these tumors. But this time I didn't know they were there, told to have another surgery. At that time, I was still very much under conventional medicine care. I hadn't done anything else at this point. A few months prior, my dad had passed away from reasons unrelated to MEM1. It was a really tough time. And again, my approach to this was just to get through it. It'll be okay. I had the second lot of surgery. I was quite rare to have had two very major pancreatic operations by this point. I'd also had MEM1 causing problems in other parts of my body. I'd been prepared for surgery and then taken off that list because my levels had come back down again. Everything had stabilized. I was like, wow, I've had a really rough time of it in the first 18 years of my life. Maybe things will start to die down a little bit. One of these conditions where things lay low a lot of the time and then they flare up, they cause lots of problems, and then they go really quiet. I never really knew when it was going to flare up. So I would go years and years with no problems, and then suddenly it would flare up again. I was always living in that fear of when is the next flare up going to be, but also wanting to live and make the most of my life. I get to my early 20s and they find a third round of tumors on my pancreas, which was absolutely devastating for me. I received the news without any context from a doctor. I just read a report from a scan and it was all medical jargon and it was really difficult to understand. In hindsight, I took that information as read and I was like, oh my goodness me, I'm going back in for a third time. Is this really happening again? as it happened, I had hugely misinterpreted those results. I'm going to take responsibility for that. I should have taken a breath rather than panicking and getting onto Google. That it was a medical document written in a certain way and it was given with no context. So I give myself a bit of grace there. It was a really unfortunate situation, but maybe it was a blessing in disguise because it clicked in me this fear of, am I really going to go in for a third time? By this point, I had only 30% of my pancreas left, and it was just a matter of them keeping on taking out more and more until potentially I had none. And the M1 patients do have an entire pancreas taken away just to deal with this problem. Fearing this outcome of when is it going to stop? My consultant, the endocrinologist, who was brilliant, and he put my mind at ease straight away and he said, I think you've misinterpreted the scan. You don't need to have surgery right away. Yes, there are some tumors there, but it's very much a case of watch and wait, particularly in MEN1. But he said to me, you do realize at some point you're going to need to have an operation. That's just the way that MEN1 works. It's a series of slightly experimental surgeries and coming on and off different medications. Again, that little voice inside of me was a little bit stubborn. It was like, what if not for me? What if it doesn't have to be that way for me? I refer back to that as my pivotal moment in my journey, which was me going from like 98% of the population with any sort of disease or disorder. You just follow what your doctor tells you to do because they know best. To suddenly, it just drove me to ask myself, what if it is different for me and what can I do to make it different? It turned the page over into chapter 2 of the healing journey. And I guess I'm still at chapter 2 now, which is absolutely throwing myself into healing modality. I've gone into it 110% because I'm one of these people who I can't just do something by half. Like I got to do it properly if I'm going to do it at all. It's led me to so many different places. I'm talking about yoga, meditation, spirituality, deep inner work, regulating my nervous system, changing my diet, manifesting and healing, all the kooky stuff, all the conventional stuff as well. Finding a place for all of it, realizing that it all has its place, it all has its benefit in my journey. It's where I have felt called to in my heart that I have kept on until where I am now. Last year, 2024, I went in to have my kind of latest MEN1 blood test scans, and the results came back to show that I had started to reverse my symptoms. This, as far as I'm aware, was absolutely unheard of in MEN1 patients before, to have consciously reversed their symptoms. My consultant said to me, whatever you're doing, it's working. It was a really nice piece of validation, but in my experience anyway, he has been so accepting of the route that I've taken, as have all of my professionals. They don't understand it. They don't endorse it a lot of the time. And they say, just be wary. But I've followed what's going on in here to get me to where I am now. And as I say, I had those trend buffing results. Just to put this into context, MEN1 is an autosomal dominant genetic disorder. It's not just a disease where there is a genetic predisposition, there is a mutation on the gene. And it means that for every child of a couple, there is a 50% chance of inheriting the disease. Stats that are known about the chances of presenting with symptoms is one of those less common names. You don't hear MEN1 around and about. That made me even more reluctant to start this healing journey because I was like, there's no one out there talking about it. And there's still a voice at the back of my head all the time that says, this isn't all those other conditions which people are reversing and healing and putting into remission. This one's different. It's not going to be possible. It's that 1 to 3% of the disease not affected by diet and lifestyle. That's a voice in the back of my head trying to get in my way. I have now for 5 or 6 years I've been committed to this journey, and having had those results last year, it was the proof I needed to carry on. For a lot of my community, and I'm sure they'll say this themselves, to have seen someone with MEN1 start down this path and come back with the kind of results I have, however it goes from here, that for me is evidence enough of what I am doing works. You know, you and I both know, Dr. Erin, that this journey is not linear by any means. Just because my results were all looking really positive last year doesn't mean that I'm never going to go through a bad phase again. But my position on this healing journey, my beliefs, thoughts, and emotions are so different now that this disease cannot hold me in the same way that it was 5 years ago, 6 years ago, or even 9 or 10 years ago when I was in surgery. It is that curiosity, that sense of exploration, that needing to be a little bit different to everyone else. That is what has brought me here to where I am now and sitting on this podcast with you, sharing this journey.
If this chat left you wanting the nitty-gritty on exactly how I've managed to buck the trends in MEN1, join me in my email community where I share my most valuable MEN1 healing resources well before they reach social media. Find the link in the description box below.